This is the second part of the video of the presentation of evolutionary epidemiologist Rob Wallace to a meeting of the Workers' International Network. It is his response at the end of the meeting.
I think sometimes we arrive at a moment where it's the question that we dare to ask that's the most important step forward. If we, even those of us who are radicalized, often accept the premises of our enemy. And that's in some ways how we get by in life and from day to day. But we arrive at a moment where we understand that those who are running things are a bunch of sociopaths. And so you must come to an understanding and accept and to reject the terms of the problem that is presented to us and the solutions that are presented to us. Cheryl's question, what to do, of course, is the key one. She went first, but I think I'm going to hold off a little bit and get to some of the other things to kind of set up to trying to answer her question. But I think the first thing is to get off our knees. I mean, stop accepting the notion that these people who run things know what the hell they're doing. They're making it up as they go along. And our presumption is that those who rule understand some aspect of what the reality of things are, and often they do not. So, you know, the notion of letting a neoliberal insult you as a neo-Luddite, when in fact the Luddites have a proud history. They were destroying technology, not because they opposed technology, but it has to do with the fact that that technology was embedded in a particular mode of social reproduction that was the beginning of sending, you know, rolling over everything in both land and labor into the hands of a few. So, you know, part of what we need to do in terms of building up answers to what to do next is to understand that historically speaking, there have been people who've been asking these questions and fighting the good fight from the very beginning. And what we need to do is to resurrect them in some way. What the present political class does, it says, oh, there's only one strain of history that led to this moment. It was inevitable. If you follow from one decision to the other, this is where we are, this is how it happened, and there's no going around it. But in fact, all along the way, all of the decisions were in play in terms of people rejecting them or wanting something else. And our job is to resurrect those histories as a way of serving as a rationale for why a different future forward is necessary and important. So in some ways, they've done things to us to accept their terms in terms of saying that using even our political ancestors as an insult, and we've accepted that. I've gotten to the point that even within the last year, I think the story of Prometheus has got it all wrong. I mean, it's hard to say Prometheus, forethought, and his brother was supposed to be the stupid one, Epimetheus, afterthought. I mean, who wants to be the person who only thinks about things afterwards? But there's much to be said about that, of thinking what the hell happened with this outbreak, how it came about, and to come to some better ideas about how to move forward. I mean, we don't have to get rid of our forethought, but the stories that these cultural artifacts and premises that have been built into much of the system is routinely incorrect and often spun in a way to force our hand to presume that common sense involves accepting the premises of the bourgeoisie. And I think we have to stop doing that. And even in this conversation today, all the questions here speak to that many of us have the matters at hand. We understand the nature of the problem. That we dare to ask those questions is a declaration that we have arrived at a historical moment that something else must be done. So let me address in the specifics some of your questions. I think in terms of Richard's questions about how to feed lots of people, I think Jim, among others, I think addressed that very well. I won't go into the details. Suffice to say, there's plenty of food. And it is about industrialization, isn't about producing food. I mean, in fact, it's about bleeding out nutrition. So you're not getting much when they deliver it. So, and it's about land grabbing, and it is about an ideology along the lines of how we began here, of basically making people engage in a kind of traumatic bonding. That happens with scientists, that happens with farmers. Some farmers and scientists do accept the premises of their oppression. Others know exactly what's going on, but they have bills to pay. So many a farmer, they may have consolidated with neighbors. They may be raking in $100 a year, but they're poor as hell because almost the entirety of their revenue goes to paying for inputs that nature typically were provided if it was taken care of. I mean, you have pesticides when you could have birds and bats and diversify crops and livestock. You have fertilizers for soil that can be enriched in ways in a perfectly natural way, and along the lines of the kind of regenerative agriculture that was brought up. So there are all sorts of means by which to return agriculture to a natural economy in which we are able to fold in the ecosystem services necessary that nature provides just about for free, and which agribusiness, often pesticide and chemical companies in addition, have stripped away and forced farmers to pay for. In some ways, I'm already answering Cheryl's question. So there's very hard-headed, practical things to be done. I think the one that always grabs my attention is the fact that industrial livestock and poultry aren't allowed to breed on site. What does that do in terms of the pathogens that are circulating? So, you see pictures of H5N1 blowing through these barns, killing every bird standing, except you might see a couple chickens still standing. It might be just by luck, but it might be some quirk in their immunogenetics that allows them to survive this particular strain. Well, we should use those birds, if they survive, to be the progenitors of the next generation, right? We now are going to use natural selection as a service on our farm to help us. But in fact, that's not what happens in industrial farms. There is no breeding on site. All the breeding is done at the grandparent level for morphometric characteristics like bigger breasts, fast growth, and all the protection in terms of disease are about vaccines and antibiotics. Oftentimes, vaccines aren't able to be developed in time enough during an outbreak. H5N2 outbreak here in the United States killed 50 million birds. Mostly by the virus itself, but also by culling. They didn't come up with a vaccine until H5N2 had already blown them out of town. So, I look at industrial production, and it's exactly, you want to select for a pathogen along the lines of what Jim was saying. You want to select for a pathogen. The best way to select the most dangerous pathogen is along the lines of industrial production now. You don't reproduce on site. You slam in 15,000 turkeys in one barn. They're pretty much genetically the same, so you don't have the immunological fire breaks necessary to disrupt an outbreak. You are, as was getting at the questions of evolution of virulence that Richard was getting at. In fact, it was long thought that virulence declines over time, but that's not necessarily the case. If you have susceptibles packed in like that, it selects for the strains that burn through there the fastest. And if you are one barn over and you have 15,000 turkeys again, this happens at the barn level, at the farm level, at the regional level. It selects for strains that can be as virulent as possible. So in some sense, to answer Jim's question, I would say, yes, it's the export of the model around the world that's leading to this on two accounts. One, it drives the deforestation, leading to the increase of the interface between reservoirs of disease, animals like bats and such. And two, once the pathogens get in there, those pathogens that might have been less virulent are selected for, their virulence and deadliness are selected for. So, and of course there is, along with that, the climate change. Yes, you have a kind of a secular trend going on where it's vastly shifting things in a way that leads a fast reduction in the capacity for ecosystems to buffer changes in the landscape, whether there be outbreaks or flooding or any of those things. And all those things can lead to the emergence of specific pathogens. So as far as does this have to involve us going back to a time that no longer exists? I mean, I think the bigger picture as to what to do is to get at that. It's not just about the pathogens, and that this outbreak is a warning shot across our bow about a multitude of woes that are on our way. We are on the precipice of multiple environmental catastrophes, all sorts of things going on, from the circulation in water to decline in drinking water, to the pollution, to the destruction of our soils, to the changing in climate, and so on and so forth. And there's a long history of explaining this. Marx began John Bellamy Foster's work on the metabolic rift. He describes how, from early on, Marx detailed the means by which capitalism basically alienates both land and labor, disconnects ecological processes that took hundreds, if not thousands of years to integrate. And so you have waste that would be, as Jim said, on smaller operations recycled one way or the other, or in fact in larger operations externalized out. I mean, the whole point of a industrial farm or in any industrial production is to externalize the costs onto everybody else and to privatize the profits. So whether that's the worker in the meatpacking plant, whether that's the farmer in their landscape, all of it turned into sacrifice zones, whether it's consumer being fed food that doesn't have nutrition, whether it's the pathogens that emerge out of these operations spread around the world. Many of the companies will blame the Chinese, many of the companies will blame the pathogens themselves, and many of the companies will blame smallholders for not engaging in the biosecurity that they had nothing to do with in terms of the emergence of the pathogen in the first place. So get to Anna Clara's question, it isn't just China. H5N2 is circulated here in the United States. H1N1 2009 emerged outside in farms that were apparently subsidiaries of Smithfield hog operations. And this, we call that outbreak the NAFTA flu, in part because once the North American Free Trade Agreement was put in, then American meat dumped onto the domestic market to destroy the Mexican domestic companies. So domestic companies had two choices: either sell out to the new multinationals coming in, or to basically consolidate their neighbors and change their production into a more industrial model to be able to compete with the Smithfields of the world. And so it was about that time in which, post what was called the livestock revolution, post World War II, when poultry was suddenly moved from backyard operations into these these large companies that ran everything fully integrated, vertically integration from eggs all the way through processing. Well, that was adapted late by the hog industry in the early 1990s. And then it was only then that the diversity of swine flus that were circulating in American swine began to increase in terms of their diversity. Up until then, it was just our H1N1 from 1918 that spilled over into hog and was the primary influenza for decades. Once they went livestock revolution, once exports increased from one side of the world to the other, you have different types of influenzas are now able to exchange their genomic segments and be able to increase the diversity of the pathogens. That happened in the US. All sorts of strains of swine influenza emerged. Once NAFTA came in, those swine flus went to Mexico. And some of the phylogeographic work, gold standard stuff, shows that, in fact, H1N1 emerged specifically from states in Mexico that had more industrial production and was fed those genomic segments of influenza from operations in the United States and Eurasia. The US, the North American operation is what this pandemic came from. In Europe, EU, you had outbreaks of H5N1. So it isn't just China. It's, China's in a particular perfect storm of transferring itself from backyard to industrial at a scale that really selects for multiple strains, but that's certainly not the only thing going on. As far as Argentina goes, well, what is China doing, right? Well, we have to take a step back. Post-World War II, the United States basically took control of running the the global capitalist system, right? Our job was to, here in the US, was basically make sure that the global capitalism ran smoothly. So we put bases around the world to, put any rulers in check if they need to be. And that was basically to protect the bourgeoisie of companies or of countries around the world. CDC was part of that. Our prevention, our disease prevention. We had our objective here with CDC was to quash outbreaks around the world. So when and outbreaks that emerged from capitalist production worldwide. So we were there. We were as I began this talk, we were the person behind the elephant to clean up the mess, right? That's why we sent people to West Africa, the CDC, to try to do something about the outbreak of Ebola Macona. What's fascinating about this after Trump is Trump never read any of the memos across Republican and Democratic administrations that our job was to run the capitalist global economy. And so it's really fascinating to see in a matter of months, the US reputation go completely down the tubes. And in some sense, it goes hand in glove with where we are in terms of our cycle of accumulation. Post-World War II, we were, or even before World War II, but certainly afterwards as well, we were on the upside of our cycle of accumulation, turning money into capital, which requires us building infrastructure, of imperial infrastructure and circuits of capital around the world. Now we're on the far side of our cycle of accumulation. We're turning capital back into money. That is, our bourgeoisie is cashing out. And that means selling everything off, including public health, including our fracking in our own country, polluting our own waterways. So our bourgeoisie is just trying to get the last bit of money as it can squeeze out of the American imperial infrastructure. China is doing something else. It's trying to, in essence, be on the front end of its cycle of accumulation, turning money into capital. So its business is basically engaged in kind of a more imperial design of basically offshoring its pollution in such a way that countries around the world now take on the worst of its operations. So, that's why we had the WH group in China buy up Smithfield. That was a really an amazing, a flag of a moment in 2013, saying what China was trying to externalize the cost of its production, and Argentina just falls in line with that way of doing things. The important thing is not to be xenophobic about it. It's not about China, as Trump puts it, right? It's about these kind of world systems theories, notions that centers of capital shift over time. You start off with Italian city-states, Spain, the Netherlands, British, US, and now China. Doesn't mean it's going to work out, in part because we are on these ecological precipices, and the Earth may not cooperate with the notion that we can just cycle into a next phase of capitalism centered around Beijing. So my answer would be, as far as Argentina go, is that, you guys are being dumped on. There's no hog there, and you guys are going to be turned into the next, pit by which hog are produced. I mean, China, they've got building like 13-story hog hotels where they have 1,000 hog per floor. I don't think they'll get that hog hotels in Argentina. But I mean, you can imagine the shit that's produced and the destruction of your landscape and the destruction of your domestic market. It isn't just about China. Your bourgeoisie in Argentina see an opportunity, and they're going to make bourgeoisie. See, the whole thing is about this Cold War between the U.S. and China. That's a pandemic theater. Both countries are trying to blame the other for the outbreak. But in reality, they worked together to help bring the outbreak. I mean, it wasn't on purpose, but in the course of China's, foreign direct investment a lot of it came from the U.S. Goldman Sachs, the investment firm, like flat out bought, farms in central China for $300 million. The world's bourgeoisie are basically an interlocking directorate. They work together and they serve nationalism for the hoi polloi, for us to fight among ourselves and avoid the kind of internationalism necessary to defeat them. So, if I was in Argentina, I would say, hook up with working people around the world, hook up with your farmers down there. There's the difficulty, with, farming is that it's not clear, there's a notion, they're not so obviously proletariat in the sense of they're landowners. And so sometimes they identify in a kind of feudal way with owning land. But I think what working class organizers need to do is to skip through that, find your interface with farming communities, repair the metabolic rift as a political project. So you're not just repairing the rift in terms of where all the waste goes, but as a political project. Here in the US, the Democrats and Republicans have both made hay over splitting the country between urban and rural. So our project here is to get farmers and working people in the city to start to look toward each other as allies to work together, because everybody's getting screwed by the same people. I mean, agribusiness is not a rural project. It's a suburban project for the most part. Headquarters are almost entirely in suburbia, and it's about sacrificing or turning rural areas into sacrifice zones, destroying the town economies that many of your farmers in Argentina depend on to basically bringing in inputs and circulate out their outputs and sell their material. There's their livestock and their crops. And what China coming in is not just about China. It's a signal to your farmers that the days in which they make decisions for themselves about what they grow and when are rapidly coming to an end. And they'll be turned basically back into, the worst of, peasant, feudalism. And it doesn't matter if they have a huge farm and bringing in a lot of revenue. All that revenue is going to be, cycled back out to the agribusiness companies. So you're on the precipice that you might be able to organize earlier in such a way to keep people from from that happening. Because once that happens, your landscaping and the people there are utterly destroyed. Here in Iowa, and I'm going to stop on that point in a second, but I do want to bring this one out. In Iowa, you have watersheds. Let's say 3 watersheds, one after another, and you might have 350,000 people across those 3 watersheds. But they're handling the untreated waste of hog and cattle of the equivalent of Tokyo, Mexico City, and New York City combined. So, I mean, it's just complete, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is really up in Iowa itself. And you don't want to turn yourself into Iowa, because then you can't swim in your local rivers. You can't eat your food because it's for processed ingredients. And so you are in a place where you might be able to get in on the bottom floor and start organizing people from the start, from urban areas right to the rural areas, as a way of stopping this, and would avoid the nationalism and the xenophobia, and do it on the strict notion that the people of Argentina have the right to make decisions about what happens in their country. Let's see what else. There's a lot going on. So to connect back to the notion that it isn't just pandemics, there's a large, long tradition, and I brought it up in part of the notion of the metabolic rift, that capitalism separates ecologies from each other and people from ecologies in such a way that you don't have the ecological cycling that goes on and the social cycling, and everything's alienated out to the point that the entirety of the system is dedicated toward generating profit in such a way that, in essence, capitalism in some ways exits off the surface of the planet. So, you know, Elon Musk, when he put that car into space, I mean, it's a dumb stunt, but in some ways it's really representative of what capitalism has always done, which is to basically exit Earth as we know it. And so what we need to do is engage and this starts getting at Cheryl's thing, question, engage into back into a practice of disalienation, of returning humanity back into Earth, reintegrating ourselves into the ecological landscape upon which we depend, and without we would die and in essence go extinct, and in such a way that we can continue to feed the billions of people on this planet, and reintroduce the kind of notions of ecological resilience to these kind of crises that are emerging not only in pandemics one after the other, but in fires and climate change and all that. Part of that involves recognizing that around the world there are indigenous groups who've been able to hold out, perhaps not in terms of the material, you know, command of their lands and such, but in terms of their ethos. So there is a matter of having to cycle out of what a lot of the left has grabbed onto, the notion of a kind of eco-modernism, that all we need to do is continue the path we're on, and we just need to change who controls the surplus value. That's the problem. I mean, and there's routine citing of Marx's a few paragraphs on machines, but in actuality, late Marx abandoned all that. In his critique of the Goethe program, he's very explicit that wealth emerges out of labor and land and labor and our ecologies together. And so those two things have to be integrated in a way such that there are resources available for us to appropriate. We do have a right to exist here. We're not here about going back to caveman times or anything like that. We do have a right to appropriate from nature to survive, but to expropriate to the point that we drive ourselves to extinction is just madness. And this gets back to my notion that the bourgeoisie who run on the global level and in our individual countries are basically engaged in a sociopathy that now needs to be abandoned. Now, as far as scientists and science and all that, my next book coming out next month on COVID-19 and other things, it's called Dead Epidemiologists. Dead Epidemiologists. And why is it called that? In part, you know, it's not to take away from the brilliance and bravery a lot of these epidemiologists are involved in, even those who are you know, they get all suited up to go into a cave to you know, to sample bats, and which must be a fun time for all. I'm sure the bats really like it. But you know, the problem is, and on the cover there is such an epidemiologist about to enter a cave, and he's suited up like that. And there's something unnerving about it, because you know, you're walking outside and you have to suit yourself up like you're on the surface of another planet, right? And this is the thing about the Elon Musk thing, the notion that somehow we're going to go to another planet. There's no way that's going to happen. Okay, it's not going to happen. And you know, it's really remarkable that for the most part we're able to walk on the surface of this planet without a spacesuit on, and that we've evolved in such a way that we can just, you know, breathe in and have our needs met. It's really easy to grow food. I'm not to take away the hard work that farming is, but you know, broadly speaking, you know, nature enriches our soils, put some water in and seed, and it grows out, and things that we can eat and assimilate and survive. These are pleasures and wonders that we've taken for granted, to the point that we're really very well willing and able to destroy it so somebody elsewhere can make a buck. And you know, so that needing to basically come back to earth, as it were, reintegrating ourselves with the landscape, reintegrate ourselves with ethos that aren't necessarily our first instinct, including among we leftists. We have some adjustments to make. At the same time, there is a long, proud history of that. Even particularly in England, John Bellamy Foster's latest book on socialism and ecology gets into that. Talks about William Morris. He talks about E. Ray Lancaster. A long history integrating Darwin and Marx that basically, in some ways our discussion today is just a more acute crisis that was recognized, long 150 years ago at this point. This is what, I talked about how these scientists are, I call them dead, not because they're not alive, but there's an aspect of, and this is what Finn was getting at, the loss of, capacity to make decisions on your own as a scientist. And in essence, references to dead labor, right? That's what capital is. There's Marx's notion of dead peasants. And there's, the people are walking around and, what agribusiness and universities are very good at are inculcating their charges with their own expectations, the company's expectations. Materialism isn't just about what's in the soil or outbreaks or anything. It extends into the social and semantic. So agribusiness and universities are very good about training their farmers and their professors into thinking that they are members of the professional managerial class when they're as much as laborers as anybody else, and there's I don't know if it's Jack London or someone along the lines of here in America, everybody is just a temporarily disappointed millionaire. It's ridiculous to the expectations that many scientists, as an identity, they assume the alienation and assimilate it in such a way that allows them to be bullied about and to, in essence, engaged in the practices of being filtered out. The hiring stage in universities is about filtering people out. The grant process is filtering people out. And as the years go by, things get worse and worse. So you might have made pay grade and being hired 20, 25 years ago, but that's not what they're looking for anymore in terms of loyalty to the company and to a particular ideological paradigm. And clearly in the end, all of a sudden they started calling the worst paid workers essential workers because they realized society couldn't continue without them. You reach a stage and there has to be a level of a change in consciousness to understand that, of course, the capitalists are very good at, keeping people against each other. Divide and conquer is their aim, whether by race, whether by within countries, whether by cross countries and wars and such, whether it's within the factory itself, or the place of work, having full-time faculty against part-time faculty, or having the, within the factory, Mike Davis describes in his first chapter of his latest book about how in the factory, different parts in the Taylorism was, spun off to different ethnic nationalities. So there's, all sorts of means by which working people are divided and conquered, or, between proletariat and farmers. There's another one. So the objective has to be about how do I make my way across these barriers that were forced on us. There are real differences, but there needs to be, we need to negotiate them to start to work together. Let's see.
Rob,
Yes.
forgive me for interrupting. We need to wind up fairly soon, so if you could bring your remarks to some sort of a conclusion, very intricately, but
Uh,
try to get to an endpoint fairly soon. Thank you.
okay. Let's end here. I'll say something on the line of this is that outbreaks aren't merely a matter about microbiology. They're not about viruses only. As we discussed today, in my yammering on and all your amazing questions, we begin to see that something as so small as a virus that we can't see is foundationally related to the social modes of reproduction that we have in each of our countries and around the world. And everybody is affected in all sorts of ways by it. And this is only something of a preview of what climate change is going to do. I mean, if anything, this certainly signaled to us that the bourgeoisie is certainly capable and willing to basically throw people under the bus for their own safety and for their own profit. So we have no choice other than to start to work together and organize together and come up with many of the solutions that some of you were already bringing up. I mean, start to look to each other and ourselves to come up with solutions. Start to, get off our knees and decide that we are capable of making decisions about what to do next. Take honor and pride in the work you do, in the sense of that, you have the capacity to, make decisions about what's best, because in the course of doing your work, that's how the world is run. That's how things are accomplished. That's how we're able to continue as a civilization. So my hat's off here to everybody. I think you guys are all right on track. I mean, these are wonderful questions. And I think that is really the first step forward is, what questions do I want to start to ask, that we want to start to ask together? And I don't have to allow talking heads who are clearly paid to be, in essence, provide a service to those who drove us into the ground. I don't really need to listen to them so much, and to start to listen to ourselves and each other.